Hey, thanks for tuning into our podcast today. You're going to enjoy it as always. We're going to be talking about a brand new TV show coming out. You're not going to believe this, but we're just warning you. You probably don't want to watch it, but it is Pride Month, and so we've got some new stuff coming out there. But we are going to talk about the convergence of the spirit of Ishtar and why Stonewall and the Stonewall Inn was the birthplace of a movement that has swallowed planet Earth and now is involving millions and millions of adherents. We're going to talk about three critical things that all converged at Stonewall and show you that this is no accident. This is actually something very, very demonic. So it's going to be a great podcast today. You're not going to want to miss it. We look forward to being with you.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
We are so jazzed you guys are with us today. It's going to be an amazing time as we continue to highlight the incredible month of June and all the news headlines that make this month so exciting. In fact, I want to share something with our audience right now, and you probably have not even tuned into this, but this is
Probably
incredible.
Not, no.
I mean, I love the creativity in our shows that are
mainstream
coming out.
media.
Mainstream media, okay? NBC marks Pride Month with a documentary on queer animals. Are you ready for this? Queer Planet will challenge the traditional concept of what's natural when it comes to sex and gender. NBC Universal will kick off Pride Month with a new nature documentary celebrating queer animals. Here's what it says. This is the header. Take a worldwide journey exploring the rich diversity of animal sexuality, from flamboyant flamingos to pansexual primates, to sex-changing clownfish, to multi-gendered mushrooms, and everything in between. This documentary looks at extraordinary creatures, witnesses amazing behaviors, and introduces the scientists who are questioning the traditional concept of what's natural when it comes to sex and gender. The show's host claims in the trailer the existence of queer animals shows just how two sexes are clearly out of style.
Oh, just having two sexes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, amazing. What's behind all of this? And I guess from a Judeo-Christian perspective, where do we begin ripping this apart? I mean, there's all kinds of crazy assumptions that they're throwing out there.
Yeah, my first thought is the fact that they are still trying to push this agenda is saying that there's still a battle to be fought. You know, I mean, they are fighting an argument. The reason they're having this type of arguments, still trying to persuade, is because people are not convinced. People sense that there is something off with this LGBTQ agenda.
Okay, but what the heck am I supposed to learn from a blowfish?
Well, and so the other issue is
or a flamboyant
or
flamingo.
How about
a mushroom?
Multi-gender mushroom.
They're trying to say that if animals are somehow not binary, animals have different sexual behaviors than humans, that somehow that justifies.
Yeah, a bacteria multiplies by reproduces by cloning and just multiplying itself. Are we supposed to do that too?
Right.
I mean, the whole idea is like, because that's natural in nature in animals and plants and mushrooms and fungi. Therefore, we ought to be doing that. That's the concept behind that. But that's not the message we're pervading at all. We're saying, no, human beings are essentially different from every other animal, every other creature in the world, and there's a set of behaviors that God's ordaining us to have that transcends other behavior. For example, animals practice cannibalism. Should we practice cannibalism also? Animals do a lot of things that I don't want my kids doing. In fact, we said, hey, you're not an animal. I don't know if you say that. I say it to my kids sometimes.
Quit eating like that. You're not an animal.
You're not an animal. In other words, you're made in image and likeness of our God. Don't do that.
But these are humongous worldview distinctions that we just cannot gloss over. If you believe in evolution, then a mushroom is a short step to a blowfish, to a flamingo, to a human.
Yeah.
and they're all on the same moral equivalency plane, right? So, there was even a song that came out not too long ago, basically talking about how animals behave and that's how humans should behave sexually. I remember, of course, psychology is where it gets to be really wild, because basically, if we're just evolved from animals, and it's all about survival of the fittest. I saw an article one time that was telling women that they should not be all that bent out of shape, that their men in their lives are not monogamous, that they sleep around with other ladies,
right.
and
that's what animals do.
They commit adultery because it's actually evolutionary. This is what the article said. It's in their genes, because having sex with more members of the opposite sex leads to a better chance of survival of the fittest, right?
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't get all bent out of shape that men don't want to be monogamous. That's just normal. It's in their genes. Deal with it. I mean, this is just a wicked, perverse kind of thinking that we've said at the very beginning of this podcast. Ideas have consequences. If you have wrong ideas, you believe a lie about human nature, about God, about life in general, you're going to have tragic results, and we're witnessing those tragic results. So now we have to have queer animal show. I'm sure that's going to be a big hit. To try to somehow make a jump between the sexual behavior of an animal and that of a human being. Anyway.
Big hits with parents, I'm sure.
And I'm hoping these types of shows are watched by like nobody except a handful of people who get excited about that, or maybe want to have sex with animals. I don't know what. But anyway, here's something else. It's interesting because we're talking about Stonewall, and I found this on the news with a picture. Stonewall National Monument, National Park Service. It says park rangers for the Stonewall National Monument and National Park Service march and twirl ribbons during the 2022 New York City Pride March in New York City. This was June 26th of 2022. But the headline says here, National Park Service reverses ban on employees wearing uniforms at Pride events following LGBTQ backlash. So this was the way it used to be. If you're representing or working for a government agency and there's an official uniform that you wear when you go to work and you're serving at the taxpayer's behest, in other words, we're paying for you to do what you're doing, then please don't wear your uniform at events like pride parades, because you might give the idea that somehow this is the official government sanctions, view. And you might actually insult some taxpayers whose tax dollars are being used to pay you to wear your uniform to go march in a parade that's full of decadence and every other kind of perverted thing. So please leave your uniform at home. If you want to go do that as a private citizen, that's up to you. But leave your uniform at home. Well, now, and this is, what's her name? Deb Haaland, Interior Secretary. She reissued a new statement basically saying these are special emphasis month, and she really wants to lean into these and fully support these, and so that's all been reversed. So now we're going to have people wearing their official unis, all right, marching in the parade, because she says we have an obligation to implement policy fairly and equitably, and my hope is that this direction addresses any implementation questions or confusion as we enter a number of special emphasis months.
Who decides on the special? Is there a commission that decides a special emphasis month? Like, who decided to make June Pride Month? Like, is there a commission? Is that an official thing? Is that just a cultural thing? Do you know anything about that?
I don't think that went through the process of Congress arguing and debating. But it's crazy. Once these things get entrenched in our calendars, it's hard to get them out.
Like, I'm not saying all these are bad, like Black History Month or whatever, but like, I'm just wondering who is there a commission for this?
Yeah.
Is it arbitrary? Is it like a media thing, or is it governmental? Because I'm like, can I make a month for me? August is Andrew Ming month.
I would be for it.
I appreciate that.
Start
a petition
I would
now.
rather make June Andrew Ming month, so I actually had something to celebrate, right? But you bring up a good point. We just commemorated Memorial Day. Here we're talking about people who gave their lives to pay for the freedoms and liberties we enjoy. That's one day.
Right.
how do we get a whole month for anybody or anything when you have one day for people who paid the ultimate price, shed their blood, and gave their life up for us? Like, that seems like that should at least get a month. Or how about 2 if we're comparing? How about 12? That's the ultimate sacrifice. So, I mean, these are good questions, and it just seems like every other month or every other week we've got some special new holiday that we're celebrating.
Because these holidays, these months, what they are is they're landmarks for the character, the culture, the values of a country, of a nation.
Yep.
Like you said, why do we celebrate Memorial Day? Is because guess what? We value people who sacrifice their lives for others.
Yeah.
We ought to, we should do, but that says something about our nations when we celebrate that, right?
Absolutely.
So whatever we celebrate, like Labor Day, why do we have Labor Day? It's a value we tell the world, we tell ourselves, we tell our next generation that as a nation we value that. So my point is, having whatever month and whatever celebration is important. It speaks something. It's not just superficial. It says something. LGBTQ or Pride Month, whatever, said something. Shouldn't that be like decided by somebody, or is it some small commission that makes that their own decision? That's all I'm asking. I don't know how that works. I guess I could Google it. But.
Well, and that's what happens to the administration. Those that are in power, they make some of these rules arbitrarily, and then the power brokers of media and the universities and all these places get behind it, and that's the snowball effect. So anyway, on the bright side, we've made the statement that when you live a lie, eventually it has a short shelf life. You pray that a lot of these things have a very short shelf life because people's lives are being destroyed. But here's another example. The LGBTQ transgender train is running off the tracks. This article said Germany joins nations skeptical of gender transition procedures for minors as evidence of harms mounts. Basically, what they're finding out. The Assembly overwhelmingly voted for restrictions as mounting evidence shows the harms of these procedures and the lack of benefits. So on the one hand, they're saying this is doing great damage. On the other hand, they're saying there's really no upside, or at least that they're seeing, for gender transition. It says here, I quote, "The case for providing gender transition procedures for minors was never a scientific one. There is no stockpile of data showing that children with gender dysphoria live happier lives if affirmed in their delusion. Rather, advocates endorse these procedures for ideological and political reasons. They argue from expressive individualism that any biological manipulation is justified, which conforms a person's physical body to their felt identity. They distract from the scantiness of the data with bald-faced appeals to the authority of medical organizations that they have captured. They demand others to, quote, trust the science, meaning the experts, when they themselves do not follow the science, meaning the data." So here, Germany, again, another major European nation that says, slam on the brakes. We need to stop doing what we're doing to these children. And as we've pointed out before, most children that have any kind of gender dysphoria grow out of it with the help of just sane adults who help them navigate that. And here we're already mutilating their little bodies so that by the time they come to their senses, there's no going back. And they have lifelong pain, agony from these treatments that do not turn them into the opposite gender, as we know, science confirms that. And they live with mental health issues. They deal with all kinds of social problems because of what they've done to themselves, or what, in this situation, what adults have done to them. And the medical community should be especially ashamed because, as it says, this has nothing to do with medical science. This is all driven by ideology.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraged. The good news is, many of these nations in Europe are coming to their senses. The bad news is America's going 100 miles an hour still off the cliff.
Right. Hopefully we'll turn around. We'll come across a bend like the European nations are starting to.
I pray that it happens. But anyway, what I want you guys to see is that I mean, I'm just pulling stuff that's coming across the headlines every single day. And so what we're talking about here is hugely important. Last week, we talked about, in Jonathan Cahn's book, about this explosion that is the LGBT movement. It's a global movement. It went from the fringes of society to a very nondescript bar called the Stonewall Inn, to a global movement that impacts millions and millions of people. And as we're moving into this month, we're going to be greeted by pride parades and the whole the media, the commercials, the marketing of major companies, the television programming about queer animals. I mean, we're going to be bombarded. And as you're experiencing all this just by being in the American culture, I just want you to be aware that how did this happen? How did this massive shift in how we viewed sexuality happen at such blitzkrieg type pace? And so Jonathan Cahn is helping us connect those dots by going all the way back to Ishtar and this demonic spirit that's been around for millennia on planet Earth, and a convergence of things that came together at Stonewall to really launch a movement that was more than just this was beyond human strategizing. What Kahn says is this is something that is demonic in its roots. To understand it, you got to understand the spirit behind it.
There's a spiritual gate that was broken wide open.
Yes.
It's interesting because even in our encounters, one of our last sessions is closing the
open doors. That is a great point. Yeah,
I thought about, man, spiritually, we got to be closing some doors.
Yeah, we no, that is a great point. We talked our last episode about Ishtar's nature was to kick down the gates, to remove the gates, and you brought up a great point where George Soros and the Open Society, which wants to remove all boundaries, national boundaries, boundaries of any sort, moral boundaries, sexual ethics, any kind of standards or boundaries. And that's exactly what Ishtar did. The gateway to America is New York City. And we recognize the Statue of Liberty. It's a point for immigration. It's a fashion leader, cultural idea initiator. It's the home of our stock market, stock exchanges, commodities, all of the financial sector. And so,
it's got a figure of Baal in it.
It's got the bull, right?
The bull. Yep.
So of all, if you're saying what is the gateway to America, I think people would agree it is New York City. Well, that's exactly where Ishtar made her entry. And so we're going to talk about something else because the entry was to a gay bar owned by the mafia that became the icon of the LGBT movement. Interestingly enough, there was a speech that President Obama gave where he talked about civil rights, and he talked about used the phrase from Selma to Stonewall. Of course, Selma being involved with Martin Luther King Jr. and civil rights for African Americans, which is a whole different thing than talking about
whole different spirit,
gay rights, something that is immutable in terms of the color of our skin, compared to something that is obviously a choice, meaning sexual behavior. Anyway, Stonewall has become the name associated with the birth of the gay rights movement in America. And so we talked about the bar, we talked about the riot that took place at that bar, but we're going to talk about a couple other components that came together to create such a powerful explosion. And one of them is what Kahn calls the Eshdam. The Eshdam is simply an ancient Mesopotamian word for tavern or pub or inn. And as we highlighted in a previous podcast, Ishtar's was especially linked to these taverns. She was the goddess, the protector of the taverns, the patron of the taverns, and it's there where she makes her living because, of course, these taverns were also associated with sexual activity. But it's interesting, she not only dwelled in the tavern, but she used it for her purposes. So upon her return to the modern world, she not only entered by the gate, New York City, but she found an Eshdam, a tavern, the Stonewall Inn, to use for her purposes. And her ancient Eshdams were known for one alcoholic beverage in particular, and that is beer. The goddess dwelled in a house of beer, and the Stonewall Inn was known for its beer. In fact, as Kant points out, visitors described it as being heavily saturated with the smell of beer. In ancient times, beer was central to the sacred libations offered up to Ishtar and the gods. This liquid was also believed to possess magical power. So there's a connection not only with gates, now there's a connection with alehouse or taverns, and now there's a connection with beer being the central libation that was being served and offered in that place. But it also goes much deeper than that, because the Eshdam was also a place of sexuality. The alehouse was used to procure sexual relations. In fact, above the Stonewall Inn, the second floor was believed to have been a place of prostitution. So folks would go down on the first floor and get their beer and have a few drinks and find somebody who was interested in connecting, and then they'd head up to the second floor, and that's where the prostitution and the sexual activity took place. The alehouse, again, was used to procure those sexual relations, and this is the same at Stonewall. The issue of sexuality is what separated it from other bars in the city, because Stonewall was known for transvestites and known to be a gay bar. And so that was a special attraction to Stonewall. In addition to the alcohol, was the sexual activity that took place and the type of sexual activity that took place. We shared it in previous podcasts that Ishtar's goal was to blur or cross or break gender lines. So we talked again about no borders or no boundaries. Yeah. So she would cast the spells that would turn men into women, women into men, give men desires for sex with other men, give women desire for sex with other women. That was her specialty, and that was certainly what's taking place at the Stonewall Inn. This was interesting to me. When he goes back into Ishtar's mythology, she is described as entering the alehouse to bring judgment. And he shares an interesting, story from history. It says, the holy Inanna, or Ishtar, made her entry into the Eshdam. She stood there in judgment and decreed their fate. What's happening here at Stonewall is everybody who's in that lifestyle is basically trying to, get back in. They're attacking the police. They're trying to knock down the barricades. And they're bringing judgment upon a system they believe has persecuted them or rejected them or not accepted their lifestyle. And so this rage is rooted in a sense of judgment or retribution. Again, that is driven by Ishtar, because this is part of
what... So Marxism. A little bit of Marxism in there.
In what way?
Well, just the idea of like we're victimized. We're victimized. The system must go down. Down with the man,
Oh yeah. The structures,
the evil structure. The man must go. Yeah. So kind of like the workers rebel, kind of like that victimization. Well,
yeah, and it's like we're almost like we're sick and tired of living the way that we do undercover or on the fringes. We want to be who we are, kind of thing. Open rebellion.
Yeah.
So he writes here, in the summer of '69, the goddess known as the Harlot went down to the alehouse. Ishtar went down to Stonewall. He points out that though it comes across as strange to Western ears, in ancient Mesopotamian texts, the word tavern or alehouse is at times joined with the Mesopotamian word for holy. Mm-hmm. So it's a sacred alehouse or holy tavern. In other words, Ishtar's temple was the tavern. And I've heard it said before, now bars are basically counterfeit churches. People go to the bar, they tell the pastor, who's the bartender all their problems. Then they get filled with the Spirit. And after they get filled with the Spirit, they're feeling pretty good about themselves. They get to hang out with their friends. And it is a counterfeit form of fellowship. It is a counterfeit form of help. It is a counterfeit form of the Spirit, because you're getting filled with the wrong spirits. And again, it was an open door to all kinds of other things, sexual in nature. And so now we have a holy alehouse, which is the temple where Ishtar does her work. And then lastly, just in the time that we have left, Ishtar was the goddess of and patroness of taverns and prostitutes, and the alehouse was where they came together. And so when you look at what was taking place at Stonewall, it says talk and rumors of prostitution had always surrounded the bar. There were reports of a prostitution ring being operated on the second floor. There were even reports of prostitution taking place within the bar itself. Beyond that was Stonewall's other and more visible link to prostitution. The tavern had become a center, a haven, a gathering place for male prostitutes, sex workers, and street hustlers of lower Manhattan. And so we've got the gate, we've got the beer, we got the bar, and now we've got the sexual component, and not just the sexual component in terms of straight sex, but now we have the homosexual and transgender component as well, all coming together.
But the prostitution component, which is like the exchange of sex for money, which is a whole other thing.
Right, exactly.
And she's got it all.
And he brings out
Yeah.
the point that the male prostitutes were not only the central to Stonewall Inn, but they actually led to the uprising. So that on that summer night at Stonewall, the two elements, the prostitute and the alehouse, converge just as they converged in ancient times under the patronage of the goddess. He said, so the movement that would transform Western culture was started by prostitutes, just as it was begun by a prostitute goddess, the Alehouse Harlot. And then he asks a question which would be good for us to get into in the future here. Why Stonewall? Why there as opposed to other taverns or alehouses? Was there something more? And we're going to get into some remarkable symbolism again as it relates to the name Stonewall and as it relates to another powerful symbol that was associated with Ishtar, and that's the head of a lion. So what does the head of a lion and the name Stonewall have to do with this ancient Mesopotamian deity named Ishtar? That'll be for our next podcast. But it's fascinating to me, again, that you see the historical parallels symbolically between what's taking place, fitting the spirit of the goddess, right? And then seeing the modern day, fleshing out, I guess, of those convergences.
It's so interesting because in the Bible, God uses signs and symbols to reveal Himself to us, and these lesser gods, imitation gods, are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Their signs and their symbols are consistent. There's a message. It's almost like they can't help but draw themselves to these similar institutions or symbols to communicate, and you just need to have the eyes to see. For most people, they don't know what's going on, but through study and through seeing what happened in the past and studying history, you realize it's the same. You can see those signs. Right. You can see those symbols.
Same principles, same demonic spirits, same spiritual warfare, same sins. Like we were saying, all of this is not new. This is all very old. And the same battle between good and evil, and the same battlefield. Sex has always been a battlefield. It is a powerful, powerful gift from God. That's why God put some powerful walls, right, around sexual expression, proper sexual expression, called covenant marriage and covenant relationship. It's because sex is precious and it should be guarded. And yet you see, again, throughout history, from again, back to Ishtar, her temple priests involved in sexual activity, sexual relationships, involved in castration and other things like we talked about, transvestitism, transgenderism, all of these things that were part of the worship of demon gods, all of which too contribute to the mutilation or destruction of people made in the image and likeness of God. It's just fascinating. Same battle, same battlefield, same demonic principalities and powers. And again, I love what my son shared. I might have shared this on a previous podcast, but it bears repeating. As we were talking about the premise of this book, you get rid of a demonic spirit, you close the door. You open the door, that one spirit doesn't come back, 7 spirits come back. 7 times is worse. What Jonathan Cahn's saying is what we're seeing in America is worse in its expression than some of these ancient expressions prior to the gospel, which seems stunning at first, but now you can see it. I mean, the global emphasis of this spirit is unbelievable. And what my son said, which I thought was a great connecting of the dots, he said, you know, Dad, if the spirit is back 7 times stronger, then we need a move of God. We need a revival 7 times stronger. And that's the truth. We do. We need a massive move of God. And you know what? God's up for it. God's big enough to do all that.
Yeah.
And
I mean, Paul talks about it so clearly. You know, our fight is not against flesh and blood. I mean, when I first heard that verse, or when I studied in college, it was like, it was just a rah-rah speech. It was just encouraging, like, yeah, we should pray. And they're, you know, he's like, no, I'm not. This is not like a symbolic, like ethereal passage. I'm telling you guys the real struggles in these demonic realms.
The spiritual realm is probably more real than the physical realm, or at least as real, but we're not as in tune to it. But really, that's the only explanation we have for what's taking place. I was always shocked, too, and we're going to get into this, but I was always shocked. Why did they pick the month of June? Why didn't they pick a month when kids were in school? And then they could really emphasize it. But it's interesting, the month of June is very, very significant as it relates to the worship of these of Ishtar. And we're going to highlight that in podcasts to come. So anyway, I'm very, very fascinated by all of this. And it gives you an understanding of at least how to pray, to know what we're up against. And that's, I guess, my desire. We're trying to recover truth during this month at Living Stones. We're preaching about biblical masculinity, of course, celebrating Father's Day, what it means to be a godly man, and really seeking to reclaim and reform some of the ground that's been taken or lost. But we've just got to keep speaking the truth. Obviously, when we highlight some of these things, we're not making fun of people who are trapped in those lifestyles. We're full of compassion for those folks. We love those folks, and we believe Jesus Christ can heal and restore and redeem. So we're not making light of that. I do want to make as much fun of bad ideas as we possibly can, because bad ideology kills people. So I have no problem mocking bad ideas, but we certainly don't mock people. We love people, and that's the tragedy of what's taking place this month. So anyway, we hope this podcast is helping to equip you with some of that information to know how to fight our battles and fight them well. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers, rulers in dark places. Our weapons are not carnal, but mighty to God through pulling down of strongholds. And so we're equipped on every side for victory. And now it's just time to keep speaking the truth. But as I said, I'm encouraged that this whole edifice is crumbling. As light shines on it, it crumbles. And I believe we're going to see a great awakening. And I believe we're going to see a great harvest of people who are saying, you know what? I'm not living the right way. I'm empty. I'm miserable. I need help. I need Jesus, you know.
There's got to be something more.
Yeah. So anyway, we love you all. Have an incredible week. We look forward to being with you same time next week. We'll see you then.